Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Diane here.
And Dee.
And we are two Black girls who talk about everything. And today we are super excited because two of my most favorite yoga people in the world are on the podcast today. This was a company, an institution that reached out to me 6 years ago and invited me to be on their platform in a time where I didn't see a lot of people of color on large yoga platforms. So today I'm talking to Todd Wolfenberg and Kat Heagberg from Yoga International. Yay!
Woo! We are so excited to have you guys.
I know. I feel it feels really special to have you here. So let me read your bio, Todd. Todd is the CEO of Yoga International, which is a global digital media company that serves 1 million plus members with exclusive content on yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, and mindful living on a subscription basis. So Yoga International's entire mission is centered around helping people live happier, healthier lives by making yoga more inclusive, available, and accessible to all. As chief executive, he's led the organization through tremendous growth. I would opt to say that you are the number one place to get reliable sourced yoga information. And that's what I hear from my followers. That's what I hear from people who are around me. So you've done a great job in being at the forefront of making yoga accessible and equitable for all of us. And I have editor-in-chief and author Kat Heagberg, and we both have a book together that just came out last month called Yoga Where You Are, Customize Your Practice. Look, I have it on the shelf behind it. Customize your practice for your body and your life. And that's at Shambhala 2000. And Kat is the co-editor of Embodied Resilience Through Yoga, 30 mindful essays about finding empowerment after addiction, trauma, grief, and loss. And that's with Llewellyn 2020. Kat has been teaching yoga since 2005. And though she initially trained in alignment-based yoga styles, which she continues to inform in her practice and teaching, she likes vinyasa flow best of all. I feel you on that. In her editorial life, she writes about how to make challenging poses more accessible and the power of language in yoga culture. You can read her work and take her yoga classes, and mine too, and hopefully Dee soon on Yoga International. Sorry, Dee, I had to give you a little plug. Hey, everybody, how you doing?
Hey, super excited to be here. Yeah.
I was inspired to do this podcast with a conversation I had with Kat last week. And she was talking about how you crafted a statement. I believe it was Todd, it was you, and who else crafted the statement for your Instagram? Janessa, that's right. I had forgotten. Had crafted a statement around what was going on in the Capitol almost 10 days ago now. And Kat was really surprised at the reaction you got on Instagram versus the reaction you got on Facebook. And that led me to start thinking about what it is we want from powerful yoga cultures and platforms. How do we want those platforms to show up in the world? Why did you think it was important as a yoga platform to make a statement about what happened in the Capitol?
I can start with that, Todd.
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, on a personal level, I was, deeply, deeply disturbed with what went on, as I think most of us, and I would venture to guess all of your listeners are and were. And I really believe that as an organization, particularly a yoga organization, one that stands on the values of yoga, which include, nonviolence and truthfulness and equity, that it's our responsibility to speak out first and foremost against something like this. Like, we have this platform, we should use it in every way that we can for good. So I felt a personal responsibility, a professional responsibility to do that. And I think when I brought it up to everyone, everybody was on board with it and felt similarly.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent summary of sort of, I think, everything that we were sort of feeling at a personal and professional level. And I think, I think it's always a challenging thing to look at. How do you include people that might be of very different political ideologies and backgrounds, making sure that, you balance left, right, center, all of those things as you're sort of putting this together and thinking about it. And at what point do certain things cross certain lines, right? That this is no longer a political issue. I think that's really, we always are trying to make sure that, because we're obviously not, we're an inclusive organization. We don't, we have people of all of these different backgrounds, of different faiths, of different, ideologies. And so we want to preserve that. And at the same time, there are certain things that happen in the world that are extraordinary events. And those don't happen all of the time, right? And so whether it's the George Floyd situation or this, there are specific events that really transcend the sense of politics. And we felt like this was one of those things.
What I've always been impressed about with Yoga International is your dedication to step out into the forefront. So very often in the yoga community, we hear nothing but silence, especially around things like Black Lives Matter. And I remember when George Floyd died back in the early, like late summer or late spring, early summer, that you were among the first to step out in the yoga community and say, look at this is wrong. I remember you created those equity shirts and you were helping to create awareness around what we should be doing as people who practice yoga. And often you are the first and the only with such a large platform to speak out about these events. Why do you think that is?
I think that was one of the things that was so shocking for me, is especially with these past events, the silence from the yoga community as a whole. Even, Starbucks released a statement condemning the violence at the Capitol. Axe Body Spray released quite a strong statement on Twitter. And if Starbucks and Axe Body Spray are saying this, this transcends politics. This is just like, either you're doing the right thing or you're not. And that's the question that I still have, is why are so many in the yoga community completely silent?
I'm waiting to see if this is going to speed up.
Axe Body Spray.
That's 100% right. I mean, look at Ben & Jerry's, that, mainstream brands are doing this. Well, what's going on? And it's not just, I don't even see it as just yoga, but like wellness brands and the wellness community, like what role do they have to play in this? And it's one of those things where it's additive, right? It's not like, so-and-so has a huge following and is going to move the needle on this. But the fact that multiple brands, lots of brands, are able to stand up and support something makes a difference at the end of the day, even if they're small. And I feel like that's where there's missed opportunity in this. And I don't know. I think that's an open question about, why there wasn't more of a direct response to this.
It kind of scares me and aligns, I think, even with large brands and even maybe large influencers with their platform, that they're afraid that if they take a stance one way or the other, that they're somehow going to lose popularity and following. And my question to them would be, do you really want to have people following you who believe that it's okay to mount an insurrection against a fairly elected official? That they're more apt, that they've missed the point of what Satya tells us, which is truthfulness, and they've missed the idea for self-study. Like, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? And why am I so scared that if I say what I truly believe, even when it is on the right side of history, that I'm going to lose this following, or that I'm going to somehow lose my status? And whenever, way back before any of this ever happened, before Black Lives Matters was trending with the death of George Floyd, I could often put up on my own personal platform, which is all about equity and all about diversity and all about inclusivity. I could put up a post about Black Lives Matter and clear out thousands of people from my feed. Lots of people would unfollow me. And the last 200-hour teacher training I ran, my last 200-hour teacher training that I'm interested in doing, I had pushback from a few of the people who were in my teacher training when I was teaching about equity, when I was talking about the responsibility of those of us who have the most privilege, those of us who have always been in charge, those of us who've always had access to justice, to speak up and to speak out. And when I spoke about that, or spoke about feeling unsafe in certain situations, or feeling marginalized based on my skin color, was quickly bypassed. That whole "we are all one," or or gaslit. Is it really as bad as you say it is? Like, why are you always talking about race? And I wonder why in the yoga community that's such a sore spot.
I think that this kind of goes back to the old saying, like, you can talk to talk, but are you going to walk the walk? And I feel as though people are afraid that if they take a stance on either side, like Kat said, you're either on the side of right or you're on the side of wrong in this situation. And I think that if people want to take a stance, I think they are also afraid that they're going to be held accountable, right, with what their stance is. And I think that's where it gets, I think, a little murky for people. They get afraid to be held accountable.
It's a totally valid point. I think, because if you're willing to take a stand on some things, then are you going to be able to continue to support that longer term, right?
Exactly.
And going back to, the earlier in the year when we, put forward some bigger initiatives around race, equity, and inclusivity, and in around the same time that the whole George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement was really growing and becoming galvanized, that was something we internally talked about. Like, we don't want to just do something that's placating the short term. Like, how do we do something that's meaningful for the long term? How do we set ourselves up so that this isn't hey, we're going to do something for a month or 2 months or Black History Month, and then just forget about it the other 11 months of the year, right? So I think it goes to, are you really willing to make substantive long-term changes that are actually meaningful, or do you just want to put out a statement? And I think, probably from a lot of larger company perspectives, it is about PR and it's about publicity and feeling like they need to do something, and they may or may not kind of be willing to do the actual work, which is an entirely different part of the equation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Todd. I think when we were crafting our statement this summer, that was a big thing that we all talked about was, okay, we don't just want to say thing bad. We want to say, this is our responsibility to do something, and this is what we're going to do. And what is it that we're doing right now? What is it that we can do better? What are we going to commit to do better in this moment? So it's not just, okay, here's a statement. It's, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to move forward. And yeah, that's the hard part.
And the yoga word for that is karma, right? Karma literally means action. And so much of what I see in the yoga community, and right around the time of George Floyd and that rise of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has been on the ground doing this work for a long time. It only really came to light, and I only saw a shift in like white culture going, oh, really? And we never thought it was that bad until that moment, until we watched him die in real time. And I wonder if we weren't in a pandemic, when we were all, glued to our computer screens because there was nothing else to do, or you were working from home, you weren't going to work, you weren't distracted by everything else, would we be where we are now in terms of understanding the plight of others? And to that point, back when we did a poll, there was a poll done, I believe it was, I can't remember the publication, but I'll look it up and I'll share it in the show notes, around how many people were on board with Black Lives Matter back in the beginning, where I was seeing marches in the tiniest of towns. Like Dee and I live here in southwestern Ontario in Essex County, and there'd be the tiniest little town in Essex County of 700 people would have a Black Lives Matter march. No Black people living in that neighborhood or in that county, but there would be Black Lives Matter marches and little kids having marches on the street. And there was this surge in understanding, or there was this surge in support. So we move ahead 6 months later, and I can see it waning, right? I can see people unfollowing me on my Instagram posts. I can see pushbacks when we post certain things. And I mean, you had a lot of pushback on Facebook around the statement you put out. And was that shocking to you?
I would say it was shocking to me. And I think part of it is because I do live I do live in Los Angeles, and I think that sometimes it's really easy to get in my little LA bubble where, you know, I go to my spin class in the morning and they're telling us to take political action. And you know, I don't interact with a lot of people who hold those extreme right-wing viewpoints. And I especially like to think that the yoga community does value ahimsa, does value does value satya. I mean, hopefully they, you know, wash their hands too, but that saucha is, for anybody who doesn't know, is cleanliness. But yeah, so I guess maybe I had a little bit of a rose-colored glasses thing going on, where I was expecting, you know, maybe a little bit of disagreement, but not right away
Vitriol.
the extreme vitriol and hatred that came up in the comments. And really just like, you know, I think my first thought was, like you said, I think, Dee, is, well, you know, if people have hateful viewpoints like that, that's not the sort of person that we want on our platform anyway. And it's not about creating division. It's not about politics. It's about right and wrong at this point.
Yeah, I think, and it was, as you were sort of alluding to earlier, huge difference between what was happening on Instagram and what was happening on
Facebook.
That
was shocking.
And, you know, Facebook has really, it just shows how toxic that community aspect of what Facebook has really turned into, and how opposed it's made people. The knee-jerk reaction of just saying like, no, this is wrong, and kind of regurgitating talking points of one side or the other. And I think it's true on all sides, right? Because there was a lot of non-constructive discussion happening, right, left, center, kind of all over the place. And, you know, it's easy, I think, on Facebook too, to get, you know, for people to kind of find a post, have somebody link to a post in groups or things like that. And then all of a sudden you've got a bunch of QAnon people that are coming in, and those weren't really our customers anyways. So,
right.
You know, it's people that are, you know, looking for a fight more or less, and looking to espouse some sort of position on something, and certainly have an agenda. And so, you know, it was, I think, a little bit surprising. At the same time, you know, we've seen Facebook go around this way a few times before, so it wasn't overly shocking. I think it's the first time, even a lot of the BLM, you know, racial equality posts that we had earlier in the year didn't have this level of charged anger associated with them. So, you know, a little bit surprising there. But at the same time, it really does show just sort of where the Facebook decorum is at these days.
Do you have any questions you want to, before I jump in? I don't want to dominate the whole conversation.
No, go ahead, Diane. I think it's going to lead into something that I want to say. Yeah.
So I was grateful 6 years ago when you reached out to me. I think Kat sent me an email, and I couldn't believe it that I could be part of a platform, because prior to seeing, I had always had Yoga International materials in my teacher training. So a lot of the articles that my yoga teacher had referenced was from your magazine. We did a lot of work with Doug Keller, and he had written a lot of content for Yoga International. So that was always, Yoga International for me has always been kind of at the forefront of providing yoga content that is truthful, that is authentic, more so lately that is diversified. Like I noticed that change happening, and actually relatively quickly. The first time you reached out to me, it was huge, because I thought, for once, I'm getting seen by a platform that is actually going to work in bringing forth diversity and equity and not being performative with it. So I appreciate what Kat said and what you said about what are our actions. It can't be a performative post. And that's a lot of what we saw with in the aftermath of George Floyd and the rise of BLM, is a lot of really performative things. Putting up that black square on your Instagram, not knowing what that black square meant, not commenting about that black square often, or just doing it because it was really, really trendy. What is your role, you feel, in creating long-term and sustainable allyship among all of us in the yoga community. How, with a platform as large as yours, do you move that conversation forward?
It's a big question. I think it's a challenge for I think everybody to tackle to some degree. But the way that we sort of have thought about it over the course of time has been, we started really in 2015 with just a handful of employees and starting to produce digital content and try to find our way in that. And so early on, we set forth an intention that we wanted to be more inclusive, that we wanted to bring forward different, and that inclusivity meaning, body types and a variety of things that we really didn't see in the yoga community happening. And so, we hired our own photographer, early on to say like, okay, well, the stock photos that are out there are not getting the job done. There's not good representation there. We need to do something, but of course you have to have some success in order to be able to fund that. So it's always a little bit of a cart and horse type of thing that you have to have some momentum behind it, and then we've been able to kind of carry that forward each year and try to expand out. Like we're based here in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. We had a pretty small footprint. This is not a very racially diverse area. So like our model pool was like very limited. So we weren't able to like have all of the representation there. And then, as we've grown and expanded, okay, now we can do things that we didn't have we wanted to do initially. We just didn't have the resources to be able to do that. So, as you've seen that over the course of years, it's because we've branched out and our growth has allowed us to do things that really we wanted to do early on. We just didn't have the capacity to really fully do. And then just partnering, right? So partnering with people like, people like you to show people that like this is possible, right? Like you can wait for somebody else to do it, or you can do it yourself. And we've just always been like, we're going to dive in head first and figure it out. And we don't know how all of it's going to fit together. You have to start somewhere and realize that, it's going to be somewhat imperfect, right? There are things that, we all wish we could have done better 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. But we're doing the best we can, and we're going to continue to just move the bar and set the bar higher and higher for ourselves. And so, in the past year, as Kat was sort of mentioning earlier, we hired Janessa and Destin to be our director of people and culture, to hold us, more accountable internally and externally to making sure that these are real long-term initiatives, that we're not just looking at short-term things. And how do we diversify our hiring practices? And with COVID and everything, and we've really reshaped the way that we work with, and we've got employees now all over the country and internationally, and we can hire from a much broader pool of people than looking at the few thousand people that are around our local area. So we've totally transformed that. And we've looked at, more diversity in that. And that's, it's been a big initiative for us in the last 6 to 9 months. So, and then of course, working with more diverse teachers across the board. So we've looked at, where have we historically not been as strong as we could have been, right? So it's a internal reflection point that, there's some things that we could have done better. We started where we started, and we grew, in the ways that we could grow. And now we're able to do things that we couldn't do before. And we're going to, just continue to make this a priority and focus on it, long term. So that's really been our, kind of continual improvement type of approach to looking at these things and being very open and transparent about these issues and the things that, the progress that we're trying to make on these areas.
Yeah.
Kat, anything to add?
No, I think you said it, Todd. I think, we're always just looking at ways where we can continue to grow. And we know that there's always more to do, that we always have more to learn, that we're not going to get it right the first time, but that we have to keep being better. We have to keep doing better. And I think we're all driven by that. And another thing that I really appreciate and makes me proud to work with Yoga International is that I think all of us really prioritize our values above all. that those values are more important than anything else, and that that's what leads us going forward. And if we have that, then sometimes it means we have to be a little bit fearless. Sometimes it means that we have to make a decision that maybe isn't easy or isn't the safest decision, but we're driven by, I would say all of us, by, okay, if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And that's the most important thing.
What I have noticed by Yoga International being on the forefront of this and always stepping up, like it was always incredible to me to be heard. Whenever I stepped into yoga spaces, and Dee and I talked about this earlier today when we were prepping for the podcast, in our little piece of the world here, there's not a lot of diversity. I would say you and I are maybe one of a handful of teachers of color that are in our community. And there's like a community board where people share what they're doing in the community. And a lot of it looks like, for lack of a better term, white women wellness. There's not a lot of attention given to diversity, and wondering why spaces here in my town are more diverse, which I think is really strange given the history of where we live. Dee's got a very interesting history. She's like an original Canadian. You've got a pedigree that's pretty amazing, in having your family be indigenous to this part of the country, and having a connection to Africa, and having a connection to all those things. Yet having a super diverse space here or a super diverse population here in Windsor-Essex County, we still are seeing very limited diversity. So I love that you, as a huge platform, are putting that out there. So at least when people aren't seeing it in their communities, they are able to see it broadcast on social media. Did I break up?
I love what you said, Diane. And I wanted to, yeah, a bit, but it's good. I also want to ask Todd and Kat, with you coming into so many homes online, what do you yogis can do? What can they work on in order to, if they're kind of riding that line of right and wrong? What are the things that you think that yogis that call themselves yogis, what can they do for personal development to, move forward, take a stance?
I would say being open to learn and being open to change your mind. That's so much about what yoga practice is. It's not just about learning how to do a crow pose. It's about learning how, like, being okay with changing your opinion. One of the most encouraging things that I've seen over the past couple of years is that people that I grew up with, and not just people my age, but like people my parents' age, really having a change of heart and having a change of mind. And, growing up, I heard a lot of in school, the value of color blindness being taught. And adults would always say, oh, don't see color, don't see people as a color. And we know now, of course, that erases people and erases their experience and doesn't bring important voices to the table. And to be able to see, like, my teachers, my parents, their friends, people who taught me say, yeah, that was wrong. I don't think that way anymore. I see that was, maybe it was coming from the best place, but that ultimately there was something missing there. So to see others who are able to grow and change and evolve in that way has been really encouraging. And to me, that's more the yoga than anything that you'll ever do in your physical practice. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. That's exactly what I would say too, in terms of expanding. Learn from a variety of different sources, whether it's a book or study with a different teacher, maybe online than you would have normally studied with in your local studio. And that's certainly one of the advantages of the online spaces, that you can study with teachers all over the world and get a diversity of teaching perspectives on things. And I think that can and be open to that, and that can transform the way that you might think about something or see something from a slightly different angle than you saw before. And having that openness really helps broaden your perspective. You might get something out of that you can then share that tidbit with somebody else and help spread that that message. So I think that's really important right now. Obviously, most of the in-studio stuff isn't happening. at least in I think in the US and Canada. So, but in the online space, whether it's free on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, like really, study with somebody maybe you wouldn't have studied with normally. Take in that information, be open, really be open about that.
I love that. And I'm always encouraging, I get a lot of people in my DMs, and I don't know, you might get this as well, 2D, what can I do? Like a lot of, I think people who aren't people of color are paralyzed around what they can do to create equitable spaces. And I always think the first thing to do is, yes, look at yourself, look at what you believe. I know that there was a few yoga teachers who were a part of that insurrection. So right when that whole thing was happening, I had people in the yoga community DMing me pictures of yoga teachers who were storming the Capitol. A yoga teacher actually doing a handstand in front of the Capitol before they ran in to storm the Capitol, which I don't know how, as a yoga teacher, those ideas align with the philosophy of yoga. And Dee and I talked about this earlier. It's because in some cases, yoga has been reduced to just the exercise and reduced to just the asana, and that we've forgotten all the things that yoga teaches us besides that. So when I tell people who feel paralyzed about what do, we get into that cycle of like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible, I'm not doing that. Okay, what else should I do? What other things could I be looking at? How do I distract myself from this discomfort? The first thing I ask people to do is just really start looking at themselves and what they believe, and ask themselves if they're actually practicing yoga, if they are separating the yoga, the asana, the physical postures from the actual philosophy, because then you're not actually practicing yoga. And then speaking up and sharing what you can share in places where your peers can see it. So that's what I love about the digital space. You put up a very bold statement, a very clear statement on what you feel and what and how moving forward you're going to change the world. And that's what we all have to do. We all have to let go of this fear of not doing anything or being paralyzed into staying still, because it's not serving us. And we're never going to move forward as an evolved society unless we start to step. We've spent a lot of time navel gazing. We've spent a lot of time meditating on it and thinking about it. We are past that now. Now we're at like critical mass where we need to actually hold people accountable, and we need to actually take action. Karma, take action. You have to do something. You have to say something. And often my mother would say to me as a kid, I'd always be like, how come people aren't doing anything about this? And my mother would turn to me and say, that means you have to do something about it. So if that's what comes up for you as a yoga person or as a person who's in a space of spiritual healing, why isn't somebody else doing something about this? Then it means that you need to do something about it. That's just my arrogant opinion.
It's a really good, I think it's a really good starting place. And also people, maybe it's even more true for Americans perhaps, but we have this fix it culture type of thing too. Like I need to do something and we're just going to like fix it right away. And that's right. Obviously like we're talking about shifting things gradually over time. I think people, as you were mentioning before, like, if you look at some of the statistics around the whole BLM movement and racial equality, like it got momentum and then it sort of started to wane. Like, how do we make this sustainable, right? Yeah. Like it can't be that way, right? For it to actually get change, it has to be a sustainable movement. And I think, for a lot of us collectively, we can't kind of check in and check out of it in those kinds of ways. It has to be sustainable long-term change. And I think that's not always sexy or exciting, but that's like what actually moves the needle over the course of time. And I think people have to also see their individual contribution. Like, okay, Yoga International is not Chevron, right? We're not Ben and Jerry's. We don't have that type of following, but we can do our part, and each individual person can do their part. And collectively that does begin to change things over the course of time. And that's what historically has worked. And so if we can just continue to move the needle, it's going to move us in a more positive direction. And
I believe it has to be honest change as well. I don't know, like you guys would agree, right? Yeah. It has to be an honest, deep down focusing, like we were saying, not on the physical part of yoga, but on that inner work, because that's the only thing that is going to propel forward and stay consistent and incline upwards into making change.
Yeah, and I think, there's often this knee-jerk reaction, and I think we all suffer from this a little bit, like this is right and this is wrong. Well, there's a lot of people that just haven't really examined, their thoughts and and so, especially in small town areas like this, there's a lot of ignorance around it, and so and a lack of exposure, because we don't have a lot of diversity here. We don't really have a construct for understanding all of the complexity around that, and so. We have to kind of meet people where they're at. We can't come at them from an angry perspective and try to and expect that to shift the needle, right? I think the whole, the cancel everybody that doesn't think like I do is going to only lead to more pushback on the other side of that. So we have to figure out more ways to bridge those gaps and meet people where they're at.
That's a good point.
That's an excellent point. And also that people change. That people change.
Right.
Yeah. Notice right now, sometimes if you're a celebrity and you've said something 35 years ago or 20 years ago that somehow gets recycled back into the current conversation, that people cancel you really quickly. Not giving people the opportunity to say, I believe that when I was 20. I don't believe that I'm 50, or I believe that when I lived in this very limited space in the world where I didn't have access to, like you said, seeing other cultures and having other experiences. And now I've traveled the world and I have a completely different experience on that. That's where I think we need to have a little bit more compassion and a little bit more space for people to change their minds. Yeah. On the flip side of that, if I've had to continually have a conversation with you over and over and over again about why when you say these types of things, that they're problematic or hurtful or discriminatory, and you're not hearing that, then I'm not interested. Like for right now, the conversation that's been going on at the Capitol is, we have to have healing, and can we just look past this moment of insurrection and all come together? I am going to be 100% honest here. I'm not interested in meeting toe to toe with the people who stormed the Capitol. I am not interested in hearing the perspective of people who want me dead. You know what I'm saying? I'm exhausted around that. I'm interested in the people who've learned from this experience and are moving forward. I'm not interested in batting back and forth with somebody who has a very limited idea and trying to change that idea.
Yeah, I think you're, there's a wide swath there, right? You've got people that are full-blown extremists, and you're probably the odds of moving and having them find some common ground and coming to terms with certain things, pretty unlikely, right? There could be all sorts of trauma and things wrapped up in that you're not likely to overcome. And then there are a lot of people that just haven't really examined it, and they don't, haven't done that self-reflection. And so how do you bring some of those people? And the way I think we have to, fundamentally believe that people can change. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's no point in any of this if we don't think we can get people to change their viewpoints on things and have some more holistic understanding of some of the more complex issues. And so I think that's really core to all of this, is that we have to believe that, and we have to meet people with and not come at them from a confrontational perspective. As you said, there are some folks that are going to bring confrontation the other way, and that might not be, probably not worth your while to try to bring those people around. Just continue to share what I think is truthful to you, and what feels right, and what feels balanced. And, I think ultimately that honesty around that resonates with most people, and they at least will come to the point where they understand where you're coming from, if they're really interested in learning and paying attention. So yeah, I think it's a super challenging time for everybody to try to grapple with those levels of everything from very extreme to middle of the road, folks that are grappling with a lot of elements right now, and a lot of, frankly, propaganda that's happened over the last number of years.
Absolutely. I'm always interested to see how this takes hold in the yoga community. I know we have a lot of holistic beliefs in the yoga community, and a lot of kind of like non-vaxxer beliefs in the yoga community. That becomes a slippery slope where it it lends to all these QAnon conspiracies. I was never more shocked in the world to see that take hold in the wellness industry. Why do you think that happens?
No, it's interesting, right? Because I think people think about it being left and right, and like, you know, but there's an interesting thing here. Like it's left and right, and then it folds over on itself. Like the far left and the far right are honestly like the same, hold like 90% of the same beliefs, right? Like it's an overlapping segment, and I think, yeah, that's you know, it's an interesting thing. The extremists on both sides are like equally dangerous in a lot of ways, and I think the yoga and wellness industry is particularly prone to being a bit of, you know, anti-science, anti-knowledge and medicine sometimes, and rightfully so to some degree, right? They've been dismissed on things that, I mean, gosh, organization we worked with before was manufacturing the neti pot back in the 70s, and people just laughed at it and said, "Oh, this is just completely ridiculous." Yeah. And then guess what? You know, 25 years later, modern medicine is like, "Oh, by the way, that actually did work. Like that works, and everybody should do it because it helps with your allergies and it helps with your colds and flus, and please do that." So there has been there's blame to go around on that on some of that, but at the same time, it's led to this, well, we just don't really know anything anymore, right? Like, what can we possibly know? And so people have been pushed further and further off to the extremes on these things. And, then you're kind of subject to being prey to any kind of popular figure that comes about and tells you some things that you want to hear. So, you know, I think it's kind of a little bit of a dangerous time, I think, for the yoga industry to some degree, but certainly the wellness industry, perhaps even more, where it's a little bit adrift right now, and it's full of people that are, you know, kind of full blown QAnon people to people that are trending in that direction, and that is a slippery slope. That's a dangerous situation. And as you mentioned before, like we know some people that were, you know, they were right there at the Capitol, yoga teachers that were right there at the Capitol, with everybody else as part of this movement. And so they're, you know, it's a real thing. And, we actually try to like minimize the amount we talk about that. I think it's somewhat rare to some degree, but at the same time, you don't want to give them a platform to increase their voice either. So, you know, you don't really even call them out. It's almost like just kind of ignoring that aspect of it because you don't want to lend any credence or any kind of additional fire to their particular anger around some of these things. So it's a really touchy issue. And I think something that, a lot of wellness brands, wellness organizations, they've seeded some of this because they've seeded the distrust in science and distrust in information so much that it's pushed people into the fringes quite a bit.
Yeah, we talked about that. My husband Kyle and I on our Yoga Talk podcast recently when we interviewed Anusha Wajia Kumar. She's one of our teachers on Yoga International too. And it is really interesting to see the correlation and the relationship between pseudoscience and between racism. And it's stronger than, I thought, I would have ever thought. And I think when I look at Yoga International's values and when I look at our editorial guidelines, our contributors guidelines that we have up on our site, those things are clearly stated. We fact check. We try our very best to not post things that are pseudoscientific or to not post things that are questionable or that could be untrue. And I think that in retrospect, I'm really seeing how that does inform our other values as well. And it's interesting to see how things that might not seemingly be so related really are much more related than we think.
Mm-hmm. I actually had somebody slide into my DMs yesterday because the commercial is rolling, or the advertisement's rolling through social media. And I think it starts with me doing some yoga in the park, and then it cuts to a bunch of different people. And I'm still trying to figure out whose voice was the voiceover because it sounds very much like a movie poster, his voice, right? Like whenever you hear those movie trailers.
Might have been John.
Oh,
No, I don't know who it was. I actually thought it was. I had somebody comment on that, and they believed it was Neil deGrasse Tyson. And
I was
said,
gonna say, like,
I would be
seriously.
honored if he wanted to do it, but I'm pretty sure we don't have that kind of reach right now. So
Seriously, the voice is like, ooh, a little Darth Vader-y, yet, ooh, that guy from the movie trailers. And so this person slid into my DMs and said to me, okay, do you actually know them? Do you actually work with them? Do they have the right to use your image? Because so many times I go to all these yoga apps and in their advertising, they have people of color or people with disabilities or a bigger bodied person in their advertising. And then I get to the platform and everybody looks the same. Is this actually legit? And that's what they were saying to me. And I go, this is actually legit. I have worked for them for 6 years. I'm actually doing yoga. I have a ton of content on there. She says, because I'm not spending my money anywhere where they just use it as tokenism. And that's one thing I appreciate about the path that Yoga International has taken, is that they know the difference between tokenism, right? Like, and for those of you who are not familiar, if you go back to the 70s, the Kool-Aid man would always like, hey, 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 and bust through a wall, and there'd be 20 white kids and one brown kid, and usually one black kid. And my mother would always point that out to me. She'd always go, oh, there's the token black kid in everything. That diversity is everyone all the time in different situations, whether it's body shape, sexual orientation, belief systems, skin color, all those kinds of things. That it's important that we're not tokenizing people who are different, but we're actually creating sustainable diversity. And I had a hard time in the beginning being on certain platforms, wondering if I'm participating in tokenism or am I opening the door for diversity. And I've always felt like at Yoga International, that was the gateway and opening the door to diversity.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that's one thing that we always ask ourselves too continually is there are so many people who have so many incredible insights to share about yoga, just some amazing teachers who aren't having their voices heard, who aren't getting a seat at the table. And, we have to ask ourselves, who isn't getting a seat at the table right now and why, and how can we give them a platform? How can we, not because, we want to get bonus points for featuring a person of color, but because this is a person who has so much to share with us, so much wisdom, and they're not getting to share that because of racism, because of systemic racism, and other factors as well, of course. And I know, Diane, whenever your name comes up and people, because we've had the opportunity to collaborate together so much, the first thing that I always say is like, Diane is such an incredible yoga teacher. Like she just like has so much experience. Like your knowledge and the way that your thinking has evolved and kind of shaped the way we think about alignment and variations and things like that. It's just so innovative and so cool. And like you should have had a seat at the table much sooner. You should have been valued as an expert much sooner. And that's really going to just serve us all, and it's going to serve our whole community, because we're all going to get the chance to learn from wonderful teachers like you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So what is the future for Yoga International? Where do we go from here? What's the path forward?
Good question. Good question. I think, we're going to continue to, our goal is to be more and more inclusive as we grow. So how do we bring even more inclusivity to what we offer as a platform? How do we, as an organization, when we started with, 8 or 9 employees, we could only work with, 4 or 5 teachers, right? So we had to, we just literally just called people that we knew and we're like, hey, would you film some classes with us, right? So it started just tiny, and then we grew, and and we were able to work with different teachers all over the place. Now it's really like we want to really work with a huge variety of teachers and bring more of those voices to the table in different ways and be able to be supportive. I think right now, with COVID and teachers being displaced, like how do we play a role in helping with that from a platform perspective? How can we be relevant to helping teachers, put content, quality content out there, make some money off of it, which is really important for teachers right now. So we're really trying to evolve ourselves, and then really, how do we also create more positivity as a platform with so much negativity on Facebook and even Instagram to some degree and these other social platforms. How do we create a safe space for people where they can be, positive and uplifted by one another and uplifted by teachers in a way that, they aren't getting right now? I think it's more critical now and probably will be even more critical going forward, for those interactions to happen and for people to find community online and in person once that can happen again, and feel like they have some support. Right now, I think everybody is struggling with that on their own. These guys, I think that's why people are listening to podcasts and people are looking to hook into things where they can feel more positivity. And so, and community. And so what we're really keen on this year in particular is bringing more of that to the forefront of what we do. How do we support teachers and how do we really foster positive digital communities so that we can really be a positive, have a positive impact on people's lives day to day, and let them interact with one another and uplift each other. So it's I think it's a big initiative for us this year, and there'll be a lot more coming forward.
Wonderful.
I love that. So great.
I think you've said it all, Todd. I think that's
Wow.
a perfect way to end our podcast. I want to say an extra huge thank you to Todd Wolfenberg and Kat Heagberg for talking to us as women trying to move forward to create a more diverse and equitable space. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.